Greetings and salutations, fellow humans. I am a human that draws other interesting humans in a way that is fun and engaging to look at. But wait a second, drawing characters that are fun and engaging to look at is actually really hard. And actually took me a really long time to even get this far. So you probably can't do that. You know, not to rub it in or anything. Oh, but wait, I know how to do just that. And I've actually failed miserably multiple times. So that means that I don't just know what to do, I also know what not to do. So yeah, I can help learn you something. Specifically how to draw/paint characters in my style, to be exact. So yeah, let's do that thing that I've just said, I guess. You know, if you want to. Otherwise, I don't know why you'd still be here. I just told you what this is. Anyway, let's start. Okay, so first things first, we've got to figure out what we're going to draw. This means we've got to use our underdeveloped frontal lobes to figure that out. So how do we figure that out? Well, excellent question, I'm glad you asked me. This means we have to assort and amalgamate images that we wish our final image to look like in a separate document. I like to use software like PureRef, but I'm sure you could find your own or just copy paste in your drawing software on a separate layer or something. I don't know, man. Do your own thing. Now, it's important to understand we're not directly copying these images. They're just there to help us understand the overall vibe of our character. Alright, excellent. After some research and development, we start sketching. We're just going to explore any ideas that we have, even the weird ones. The weirder, the better. Who knows? You might actually like how it turns out. Usually this takes a fair few sketches, so aim around 9 to 15, hell even more than that if you can handle the mental bandwidth. Usually you'll find the last one is usually the best one. Also, don't be afraid to take the last sketch you've done and draw over it with new details. This is an easy hack to get more volume of sketches without having to completely draw something else. Okay, once we have something we're even remotely proud of, it's time to take it to the next phase. Okay, so I chose this sketch to take into our next stage. This is where we actually start the creation of our super sexy anime character with 3 legs and dual-wielding scythes. Anyway, back on topic. Line art. What are we trying to achieve here? We're not trying to go for super dark, heavy lines like inking or anything like that. Think more in terms of penciling, like in comic books. So keep the opacity pen pressure on. Alright, so the basic rundown is you start with the basic figure drawing of the pose you want. And then you just kind of draw over the top of it. Yeah, amazing insight, I know. But your fundamentals are going to be important here. More specifically, form is something you're going to want to practice the most. As for lines and line quality, that's mostly dexterity based and will only come with practice. Yeah, I get it, it's not very sexy to hear that, but that's just the way it is. But let me leave you here with something you can take away from this. I like to use lines with a mix of convex and concave lines and shapes. And a lot of time, they're immediately right after each other. Let me show you what I mean by this. Let's look at Joe Madureira and his work. He's got these striking curves closely followed by these sharp points. And you can see how he implements his line weight in these areas, which creates a very striking and visually pleasing line art. But we don't have to go as extreme as him, as it will be likely painting over most of the lines anyway. And lastly, I personally like to add hatching or shading, depending on your own definition. It helps me later on with working out light and makes it a little bit easier for me later on. Alright, next step is to do the flats. This part is very tedious and not very exciting, so I didn't really record this bit. But this is where I add flat colors behind the line art we've just done. Basically, I'm just segmenting clothes and various items with a base color, which helps me think about the actual materials and how to present them. For example, I used a darker flat tone for stuff like leather and a slightly lighter tone for cloth and so on. This step in particular took a little bit of extra thinking as there was so many dark colors and I wanted to separate them and make sure they weren't just a mess of black. Okay, time for some big noodle brain activities. Let me tell you the magical cheat code that is ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is the shadows in between objects like so. So what we do to emulate this is we use our lasso tool and a soft round brush, and we lightly color in the shadows with an almost black color. If done right, this will start to make your image look like a 3D model. You can hide your line art layer every now and again to make sure you're on the right track. I also like to use a brush I found by Mark Brunet, who has a brush called Skin Cavity. This brush makes it easy to lay down shadows quickly, which is very useful and much more efficient. However, you do get more control with the airbrush and lasso tool. So I recommend experimenting both and getting some practice in. So now with our shadows done, we now add something called gradient maps. Gradient maps are a useful tool to add colors. They can make coloring really easy, and I find they add a lot of nicer colors that add a lot of pop and flair to your image. I'm not going to do a whole tutorial here in this video, but I highly recommend you look around on YouTube. Okay, after that, now we have a base for some actual painting. That's right, we now have to do some actual painting. Most of that involves painting over the lines, and all I can really say about this part is, God damn it, why does it take so long? I'm willing to admit this could theoretically be a flaw in my process, but you asked how I did it, so whomp. I'm really thinking of ways I could speed this up somehow, so stay tuned. I've got some really good videos planned. Now, after hours and hours of back-breaking, painstaking painting, where I basically just blend the lines and the shadows together, we now have to add some secondary highlights. Yes, we're now at a stage where we can actually start some highlights. How I add highlights is I like to use a hard brush, either a hard round or a hard square brush, and I like to lightly go over that with a soft airbrush, sort of ease that transition a little bit, and you'll start to see the image taking place. It'll start to pop out and look like it's an actually painted image. So it's really fun to do that bit. It really starts to take place, and you really start to see your image come alive, which is always fun. Just remember to only add the highlights where the light is starting to actually hit your character. Don't want to go crazy with, don't want to do any this weird pillar shading. Get some directional light. Usually it's sort of coming down from the top left corner of the viewer, and don't forget to think about the actual lighting situation in your image. For this one, I used a sort of an outdoor light, you know, sort of like the sun is raining down on my character here. And then depending on the environment, there's also going to be some secondary lights like the sky or something like that, or even a backlight. Start looking at things like these. And now, after we've set all this up, it's finally time for the cherry on top, and that is our specular highlights. Now, this is a very specific kind of highlight. It's usually a very bright, very small highlight, which really creates some pop and some pizzazz in your image. Just remember that specular highlights are typically on certain materials, like, for example, this leather. This leather is on this character is going to create a lot of specular highlights, and even things like metal will have a really bright specular highlight. So use it sparingly, but when used right, it creates this amazing pop, which is very pleasing to look at, and really, this is really the stage where you start to really admire what you've created here. Okay, it's time for everyone's favorite part of the process. It's color dodge! Actually, I mean overlay. I used overlay here. I used it specifically here to make it look like the sun was shining down a little bit more. Yeah, I like Ross Draws. I like his dog. It's mostly it for this image. I had a few extra things like background and presentation, but for the most part, this is the meat and potatoes of how I draw characters. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something. Okay, that's it for this video. If you learned something, please like and subscribe, even comment on what I could do more of. Thanks, I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.